I turned 25 years old this year, and as crazy as this might sound, I could probably quit my job and never work again for the rest of my life. So in this video, I wanted to explain how. And I'll say upfront that I did not get a big inheritance, I don't run my own business, and I didn't pick any lucky stocks. Instead, the real reason I could retire as a 25-year-old is because I need very, very little. Like, just a couple of $100,000. But to understand why I need so little, and why you probably need way less money than you think, give me just a minute or two to explain how to calculate how much money you need in order to retire. Knowing how much money you need to retire is maybe one of the most important things that you will ever do in your life, but most people do not have a very good estimate. I actually made a few retirement calculators to help you do this, and I'll show you how to use them in a minute. But if you would like to follow along, there's a link in the description so you can download all of them. But first, at a super high level, think about it this way. You are financially free as soon as you can afford your lifestyle without working. So to become financially free, you want to replace your annual expenses with passive income as fast as physically possible. And the most popular form of earning passive income is by investing in the stock market, which averages about a 7% per year return after adjusting for inflation. And if the stock market returned 7% per year every year without fail, then you could quit your job as soon as your annual expenses were just 7% of your total investments. In other words, if you spent $70,000 per year, then you would need $1 million in invested savings, because that $1 million would produce $70,000 per year in passive income. But unfortunately, the stock market can be just a little bit unpredictable. So counting on a 7% rate of return every year is just way too risky. Instead, if you look at the historical data, you'll see that withdrawing around 3 to 4% is generally a lot safer. So that's what you'll see over here in these retirement calculators. So just as an example, if you spent $60,000 per year, then you would want to have about $1.5 to $2 million in order to safely quit your job. With $1.5 to $2 million invested in the stock market, that would probably produce about $60,000 per year, which you could withdraw and fund your lifestyle. So you would be financially free. But of course, I have nowhere near $1 million as a 25-year-old, much less $2 million. Luckily for me, I probably need way less than that. Last year, instead of spending $60,000 per year, I spent $20,000. But even then, I would still need about $500,000 to be financially free. But I've only managed to save about $250,000, which is a lot of money to have saved as a 25-year-old, but that's only enough to spend about $10,000 per year in retirement. But believe it or not, that's probably enough. So how the heck could I live on $10,000 per year? Well, let me show you how to live comfortably on $10,000 per year. I'll be honest. Where I live, living on less than $10,000 per year is basically impossible. I mean, the recommended annual income is $90,000 just for a single person. Of course, you can get by on a lot less than that, and I've made videos in the past about how I spend closer to $20,000 per year. But if I wanted to live on less than $10,000 per year, I'd have to live in a van. And while that's totally a badass way to save more money, that's definitely not how I want to spend the rest of my life. And remember, we're talking about how much money you spend in retirement. I could live in a van right now, but I definitely don't want to do it when I'm 70. Now, $10,000 per year is probably doable in some super cheap areas, but even then, you would still probably have to be pretty extreme. Even in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the #1 pick for cheapest places to live by US News, the recommended income is still over $30,000 per year for an individual. So I am sure that there are some people in the US living on less than $10,000 per year. But there are very few of them. But here is where this gets really interesting, because living on less than $10,000 per year in the US is considered extremely frugal. But living on $10,000 per year in some other countries is pretty much living the dream. So let me show you how big of a deal this is. I never even considered living outside of the US until I came across this blog called GoCurryCracker.com. It follows a couple who decided to quit their jobs in the tech industry and move to much cheaper countries, like Thailand. Between the two of them, they spent just $2,300 per month while living in Thailand. and that is more than $10,000 per year, but that's for 2 people. And during that time, they were living in super bougie apartments with a rooftop pool, gym, and regular cleaning. They went on a bunch of touristy outings, and they ate at restaurants for 99% of their meals. And yet, despite all of that, they still spent less than $1,200 per month per person. To live that same lifestyle where I live, it would literally cost about $200,000 per year. And while Go Curry Cracker wrote that blog post back in 2016, not a whole lot has changed. So let me show you something. This is apartments for rent near the area that I live in Washington, D.C. And you'll see that even studio apartments are going for $2,000 per month. And that's pretty standard. Pretty much all of these places are going for that. Here's one at $2,859 for just a studio. And scrolling down, I mean, here's some place with 3-bedroom apartments going for $11,000 per month. So let's click on that place. Scroll down a little bit. Alright, let's click on these 2 bedrooms. Yeah, I mean, you're seeing apartments for $4,000 a month. These might get even more expensive. Now $5,000, now $6,000 a month. If you're spending $6,000 a month on your apartment, that's $72,000 per year just for a place to live. But now, let's switch over to thaiapartment.com and do some house hunting. All the prices here are in baht, and $100 is equivalent to about 3,300 baht. Take a look at this building, which was one of the first ones that got recommended. The apartments in this building range from $240 a month for a studio apartment up to $780 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And you can find even cheaper apartments if you want to. Every single apartment on this page is renting for somewhere between $150 to $250 per month. So this is how it's possible to live very comfortably on less than $10,000 per year. And remember, if all you need is $10,000 per year, then you can probably retire on about $250,000. But that still means that if I wanted to retire by age 25, I still had to save $250,000 by the time I turned 25, which is still a lot of money. So let me show you how I did that. I live in a really big city. And the good thing is that big cities are really expensive. That might sound like a bad thing, but it's really not. So let me show you why using this bag of peanuts. Let's say person A earns 10 peanuts per year, and maybe they live in a city where the average cost of living is 9 peanuts. So they save 1 peanut per year. And let's say person B lives in a big expensive city, so they earn 100 peanuts. The city is so expensive that they still have to spend 90% of their income every year, just like person A did. That means that they spend 90 peanuts and they save 10 peanuts. So even though person B spends 10 times more than person A, they also save 10 times as much. So yes, you will spend a lot more in a big city, but you'll also earn a lot more. And this is super important because person B doesn't need to live in their big expensive city forever. The 10 peanuts that they save every year is going to go so much further if they move to where person A lives. But person A would have to work for 90 years just to save up enough peanuts to live for 1 single year where person B lives. And this is a huge reason that I was able to save $250,000 by the time I turned 25. I only earned an average income for the area I live in, but for the area I live in, the average income is about $115,000 per year. So even if I spent 80 to 90% of my income like most people do, those savings would still go a really long ways in a place like Thailand. But this becomes even more powerful if you don't spend like the average person. Because here's the thing, cities make it really easy to spend a lot of money. I'm surrounded by expensive apartments, nice restaurants, and fancy things to do in the city. But even though it's really easy to spend a lot of money, you still don't have to. Other than rent, it's still pretty easy to keep most of your expenses low. Let's go back to our peanuts example. In the first example I gave, I assumed that person B had to spend 90% of their income every year. But what if they didn't? If they could live on the same number of peanuts as person A, which was just 9 peanuts per year, they'd be saving 91 peanuts every year out of their 100 peanut income. That's over 10 years worth of living expenses, even in their expensive city. And then if person B still moved to person A's city, they could probably reduce their expenses even more, but they'd still have their 91 peanuts of savings. This is basically what I did. Even though I live in a city where the average person spends about $90,000 per year, I've been living on less than minimum wage. So that's why I'm saving over 80% of my income. And even better, that's a big city income, which will go very far in a cheaper area. So I'm spending less than most people do in much cheaper areas, while earning way more than you can typically make in a cheaper area. So this is how I saved $250,000 by the time I turned 25. I make a big city income, but I spend like I live in a rural town. And then I just save and invest all of the rest. And if you are interested, I've made a ton of other videos on this channel about how exactly I live on so little. So make sure to check those out if you want a more detailed breakdown. And right now, I am what most people would consider extremely frugal. But remember that by moving abroad, you could have a much nicer lifestyle while still spending even less money. So I could probably live much more comfortably in Thailand on $10,000 than I'm living now on $20,000. I could spend half as much money and have a nicer standard of living. But there's sort of a big question which I haven't addressed yet, which is if I could retire by age 25, then why haven't I quit my job already? It's honestly a very fair question. So let me explain what I'm thinking. There's really 3 reasons that I haven't decided to retire yet. And the first is that I really like the option to retire anywhere, even in the US. So it's possible to retire extremely early by moving to a cheaper country. But it's always easier to move from an expensive country to a cheaper area than it is to move from that cheaper area back to the really expensive area. So if I retire and live in Thailand for 20 years, I don't want to suddenly decide that I want to move back to the US and need to double my savings. And this sort of goes hand in hand with the second reason that I haven't retired yet, which is that I'm so close to reaching financial freedom even in America. Sure, it would be cool to retire as a 25-year-old after just working for 3 years, but if I just work another 3 years, I could probably retire pretty much anywhere I want in the world. I might not be able to retire in downtown New York City, or at least not very comfortably, but I have never wanted to do that anyways. So if I had to work several decades longer to retire in America, then moving to Thailand would sound like a pretty sweet deal. And for most people, this really is the case. Retiring to a cheaper country could literally help them retire decades faster. But since I'm already saving such a high percentage of my income, it's probably just worth it to work a couple more years, save up another $250,000, and have a lot more options. But if I'm truly honest with myself, the real reason that I haven't already quit my job is because I'm a pansy. At the end of the day, even if I did retire as a 25-year-old, I wouldn't do nothing for the rest of my life. At an absolute minimum, I would keep making these YouTube videos and helping more people reach their own financial goals. And even if that's all I did, it wouldn't take much to cover my expenses in retirement. I mean, after all, we're only talking about $10,000 per year. And even if all I did was just cover my expenses, that would still give me time to let the $250,000, which I've already saved, just grow and compound and turn into a bigger and bigger nest egg. So eventually, I'd still probably be able to move back to the US or anywhere else in the world. And there's a real chance I end up making even more money in retirement than what I spend, which means I just become richer in retirement. So the truth is, I probably should just retire now. I just haven't pulled the trigger on it. But whether you choose to retire abroad or not, the only way you'll become financially free, especially for an early retirement, is by investing. And while you probably already knew that, you probably don't know some of the more specific investment strategies that you should be using if you want to retire early. And that's why you need to watch this video right here, where I explain how to safely retire early, how to pay less tax in retirement, and how to get early access to your money that's saved in retirement accounts. Check it out next. I hope you love it.